Based on the agreement made with their customers, companies might want to set up jobs with lump sums. Now, these lump sums are amounts that they will invoice to their customers based on an agreed time frame. So, for example, in advance before the project starts, then 30% halfway the project, and then maybe the rest at the end of the project when everything is approved. This is just an example. So let's have a look at how we can do this in Business Central. So I will go to Jobs, and I will again use the same job, so set up work areas. So let's have a look at the task lines. And here you can see that in the task lines, I have added 3 lump sum lines. So lump sum number 1 in the preparation phase, then number 2 in the execution phase, and then finally number 3 in the closing phase. So that's the first thing that you might want to do. You could also include the lump sum amounts in the planning lines of another task, but for me this is the most transparent way of working. So creating separate task lines for each lump sum payment. All right, now what is a lump sum payment? It's basically a planning line based on a GL account. So let me select the first one. Let's click on Process and let me go to Job Planning Lines. So in here, the first thing that is very important is, of course, that we select the line type billable, because this is something that we will invoice to the customer. Then there's the planning date, so the date on which you agreed with the customer to invoice the amount. So let's take, for example, April 30. Then the type. So in this case, theoretically, you could also use resource and item, but in most of the cases in real life, I always use GL account so that we can just invoice the customer based on a GL account. All right, let me search for an income statement account. So let's take income services. Yeah, this one. There we go. Then the quantity. Let's keep it simple and just use 1. And then the unit price. So this is the amount that we are planning to invoice to the customer. Sometimes I get a question if we can enter a percentage. So that's not really possible. You have to enter a unit price. So for example, let's take, I don't know, 8,000 local currency. So there you go. So this is now my lump sum 1 planning line. So if I now escape back to the job task lines, and if I reopen them to refresh them, you can now see that there's a lump sum 1. This line, of course, doesn't have budget amounts because it's a planning line of the type billable. But if you scroll to the right, you can see that there is a billable total price. So this is the price that we will invoice to the customer. Now, considering my previous example of setting up planning lines, there's one thing that I should change, very, very important, because remember, in the previous example, I've created a planning line for the kickoff meeting. So let's go and have a look. So I will click here on Process Job Planning Lines. So remember, we budgeted Linda for 3 hours for the kickoff meeting, but I entered the planning line with both budget and billable. And this is, of course, wrong for my lump sum example, because I already entered the billable amount. If I would leave this as it is, then when you create an invoice for the job, Business Central will also include these services. Now, maybe that's something that you specifically would like to do in real life, as kind of an exception. But in general, if you use lump sums, the other planning lines of resources and items in most of the cases are just budget lines. So that the cost of Linda is considered, so 3 hours, total cost of 254.10, but that the income, the sales, is coming from the lump sum line. So let me escape back. Let me also refresh by reopening the task lines. So now you will see that if I scroll to the right, that the kickoff meeting only has a budget, and the lump sum 1 line only has the billable type. You see, so we expect a turnover of 8,000 and a cost of 254.10 at this moment with only these 2 planning lines. But that's how you can create a lump sum planning line in your jobs in Business Central.